right, hello everybody. My name is Dakoba and welcome back to Satisfactory. Today we're going to be building a fuel power plant. Now we are desperate for power. Our production is only at about 3,800 megawatts. Our maximum consumption is exceeding that by almost 10%. So we need something to get us into the next stage of the game. Now we don't quite have access to turbo fuel or rocket fuel, and that's really the big power plant I want to build. So today we're going to do a smaller diluted packaged fuel power plant, which is a really great sort of interim one. It is the most efficient form of a plain fuel power plant without going into turbo or rocket fuel, and will provide plenty of power to get us until we are in a position to produce those power plants, or even to get us to nuclear if we wanted to go that path. Now, in order to do this, we are going to need a few technologies, both out of the hub and in the MAM. In particular, we're going to be working with 360 crude oil per minute, which means our input line is going to need to be a Mark II pipeline. So I'll need to go ahead and unlock this milestone and get this one away. We're also going to be constructing this using blueprints. So we're going to be using the Mark II blueprint designer. And of course, we will also need petroleum power and fluid packaging because this is a packaged fuel power plant. In addition to that, we're going to need a couple of recipes out of the MAM. Now, fortunately, we have a large hard drive library we've been banking up, and we do have both of the recipes we need. The first one we're going to need is heavy oil residue. That takes crude and turns it into heavy oil residue directly without requiring sort of an intermediary processing step. That's going to give us a ton of heavy oil residue, which we can then turn into fuel using the diluted packaged fuel alternate recipe. There is a later version of this game that doesn't involve packaging that we could also use, but since we don't have the blender yet, this is the one that's available to us. This is the one we're going to use. And with blueprints, this is nice and easy. Now, in addition to that, we're also going to be using a bunch of power shards, but fortunately, I have 95 power shards on me. I think I have another 50 or so on my cameraman. And so we are going to be just fine. This plant will use 36 power shards, and then we also have a ton more power slugs that we found, and we'll continue to get more as we go through the game and explore, and can also produce our power shards in the not too distant future. Let's take a look at the design for the plant. All right, now here is the plan for our fuel power plant. We have one of our extractors over there that is currently providing for our computer factory and is using 240 units of crude oil. If we overclock that extractor to maximum speed, it'll be producing 600, which means we have 360 crude oil that we can work with. We're going to combine that with some water to produce the diluted packaged fuel, and then we're going to burn that to produce power. Now, the specific design here is that we're going to take some water from a water extractor and combine that with a stack of canisters to produce some packaged fuel. Meanwhile, we'll take that crude and convert that into heavy oil residue, which will produce polymer resin and diluted packaged fuel once we combine it with the packaged water. Now, the polymer resin we're just going to sink for now. There's not enough polymer resin that I feel like it's worth setting up the logistics to do anything else with it, so we'll just chuck that into an awesome sink, get a few extra tickets out of it, and that will be fine. The packaged water and the heavy oil residue again will be combined to produce the packaged fuel, which will then unpack to burn the fuel, and the empty packages will loop back to gather more packaged water and sort of feed the cycle. So we only really need about a stack of canisters, and we can even prime this with either a stack of packaged water or a stack of packaged fuel, and packaged fuel may be how we end up doing it. It's a pretty straightforward build once you understand all the pieces. So let's go ahead and get this thing set up and take a look at how it works. All right, now before we take a look at the finished plant, let's go through the blueprints really quick. We have a crude input line over here on the left and a water input line over here on the right. For our outputs, we have our sort of excess polymer resin output right here on this belt line, and then we have an output in the back corner for fuel. Now I've tried to color code the pipelines wherever I can, so black is for crude, orange is for fuel, blue is for water, and purple is for heavy oil residue. And that just helps make sure that I know what's in each pipeline, or what's meant to be in each pipeline from a distance. Now the crude oil comes in at a rate of 30 per minute and gets converted into 40 heavy oil residue that produces some polymer resin, which we then send out to, right now, sink, and probably that's all we're going to do with it. Now the heavy oil residue from the first refinery flows into another refinery where it's paired with packaged water. You can see we're using a power shard to overclock this. We are swimming in power shards, so I don't see a problem with using a few of them in this plant. I think we're using 36 in total, 3 for each section with 12 sections. That packaged water is coming from our water input line, going into a packager where it will be combined with some empty canisters we provide, and then that produces the packaged water, which gets combined with the heavy oil residue to produce the packaged fuel. The packaged fuel then goes into another packager where it gets unpacked, the fuel flows on through our fuel output line, and the empty packages go into a container where they can be fed back into our packager, into our water packager to continue feeding the system. So we're only going to need about a stack of canisters, and how I actually ended up priming this was I just dumped a stack of packaged fuel into this packager, and that sort of primed it, and also introduced 100 canisters into the system, so that worked out really well. And that's all there is to this blueprint. It's pretty straightforward, and it turns 30 crude oil into 80 fuel per minute, which is a really nice conversion rate. And we may end up using this as part of a turbo fuel power plant later, because this is the first step in producing turbo fuel in most cases. Now, our other blueprint that we have is also pretty straightforward. And you can see that I did go ahead and modify the blueprints to have foundations underneath them. How I did that is I created just a blank platform blueprint. If we look here, that's this platform blueprint. That's just a set of foundations. And then I placed the blueprints I had filmed in the time lapse on top of that in order to create the blueprints with the foundations underneath them. Now here we have a single sort of fuel pipeline that just runs across and feeds the 2 generators. Since we need 4 generators per bank, this allows us to do that. You can fit 4 generators onto a single blueprint, but it involves a fair amount of clipping because the 4 generators completely fill the 5x5 space. So you have to, run a pipeline that sort of clips into the front of them and does some trickery with sort of getting into the generators. I prefer this and just making the plant a little bit bigger. It's, we're not going to run out of space. So, all right, let's pop on over and take a look at the plant. All right, over here at the power plant, there are a few things I want to highlight, and the first one starts with our input line over here. You can see we're using the Mark II pipelines. That's because we are transporting more than 300 units of crude here. So I've upgraded all the pipelines through this entire section to Mark II just to make sure that there's no bottlenecks anywhere. And as long as we are drawing appropriately, and both of our sort of consumption stations, our computer factory and our power plant are working well, we shouldn't have any trouble actually getting the full 600 supplied here. Now, the other technique that we're using to ensure a good flow rate is that we're moving our fuel downhill, or our crude downhill. And this is really helpful with any kind of liquid. You can see that we are extracting the crude oil at this level, and it's flowing sort of flat along the ground. That generally doesn't run into any problems. Where you occasionally see issue is if you move uphill, and so we want to make sure that we are building down wherever we can. So we have a slight downward slope here, and that keeps the crude oil flowing nicely over into our power plant. Over here at the power plant, we are continuing our downward sort of trajectory for our fluid. Whenever we enter a new section, that flows down into the refinery, just again to help make sure things don't back up. Whenever fluid needs to pause in a pipeline, if you are trying to max out the capacity of a section, that can cause it to sort of, propagate backwards all the way to the extractor and cause fluids to back up. And flowing downhill won't necessarily always alleviate that all by itself, but it will go a long way towards helping it out. Let's go ahead and change to be orange so it's a little more obvious there. Okay. Now, there are a few places we could be a little bit more efficient. One of those is that we are running, at the moment, a awesome sink for each of the sections of the plant. We really only need one awesome sink for the entire plant, but that would require running some additional logistics. And for the purpose of sort of keeping the building repetitive and maintaining that flow state while I was building it, I decided to set down a awesome sink in each section so we could save about 300 megawatts of power by eliminating all but one of these. Each refinery is only producing 20 polymer resin with 12 sections. That's a total of 240, and that's certainly something we could handle on a single belt line here. Similarly, we are producing, we could remove about a third of our water extractors. Each water extractor can produce 120 units of water, and each section is only using 80 units of water, so we could eliminate one out of every 3 sections and improve efficiency in that way a little bit. Now, this back section of the plant did have to be done by hand because you can't use water extractors with blueprints. They don't play nicely, so that is why it is built in this way, but it's certainly a place where the design could be improved on if we wanted to eke out a little bit of extra power there. Now, one thing that I'm not sure that was made clear when I was setting up the blueprints is that blueprints can't connect to one another directly with pipelines. So whenever we had sort of a bridge between blueprints, we did have to manually install a pipeline connection there. So our fluid output line stops at this junction point, and our power, our burn section starts at this one. So we had to sort of introduce that gap. So we had to fill that gap manually, and we also had to fill the gap between the 2 burn sections on each part of the plant as well. But overall, everything is flowing nicely. If we take a look at our power production, you can see that it is a nice smooth graph and that everything is working the way we want it to. I did also set up a power control station over here. This includes a valve if we ever want to sort of eliminate the ability to provide fuel to this plant. If we want to redirect this elsewhere, we can do that. And then we have this structure that contains a power control switch, which we can use to, turn off the plant from the rest of the grid. And so we can see the plant on this side is producing its 12,500 megawatts, and the rest of our grid is producing its 3,750. And then by activating the switch, they combine into a unified power grid. And that is what we are looking for, because that gives us about 10,000 megawatts of power to work with, which will be plenty to build several more factories and get us into the next stage of the game and the next stage of power production. But yeah, that is a power plant build all complete. This should last us well into the remaining portions of the game, and so I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. I'd like to thank you guys for taking a few minutes out of your day to spend with me here in the world of Satisfactory. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you have, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. My name is The Koba, and I hope you have an efficient day. I'll see you soon.